Hello, and welcome to the last, I think it's the last presentation in the siberXchange event. My name is Daniel Crowley, and I am the Global Head of Research for the X-Force Red team, which is an offensive security group inside of the IBM security group in IBM. And I'm here today to talk to you about the state of security, the sad state of security, with regards to the Internet of Things and smart city technology. We're going to talk a little bit about where we came from, where these technologies even came from, some of the notable events that have happened with IoT and smart city devices, and a little bit about where we're going. And in between, I'd also like to show you some things that I've dug up over the past day or two. So very much the present. So let's get started. And first, I want to talk about the vast number of different names for these devices. We have industrial control systems, smart city, industrial Internet of Things, operational technology. Probably my favorite term is cyber physical systems, which basically refers to everything, everything where you have a system that is computerized that also interacts with the physical world. But I think that to some degree that this is a distraction. We are converging in on this point in time where just everything has a computer in it, and it's not that useful to make a distinction about, what type of thing with computer in it is. It's just we stuck a computer in it. Hooray, future. Maybe. So let's start talking about the technologies themselves, though. And with ICS, which is a term that kind of comprises a number of things, you have this need that was born of process control, where you started out with a panel that looked very much like the one that you see here, or at least it looked similar. This is one from NASA. This is an image provided by NASA of one of their control panels. And this is it's a step removed from the panels that are actually physically on the equipment, whether it be centrifuges or boilers, HVAC systems, something like that, where you had all of these just analog dials, switches, and then you moved to this situation where you had a centralized control room. And when you look at pictures of these, and I highly recommend that you look at pictures of these because they look beautiful. And they kind of look like they're straight out of a villain's appearance in a James Bond film, where you just see this control panel stuff, all these dials and switches just all over a room, and then this guy with a cat that he's petting just turns around in a spinning chair. It really does look like that room that you imagine with all these buttons and switches everywhere. And all of these buttons and switches would be connected throughout some plant for process control, and all of them would be connected either pneumatically or electrically to the actual system. So there was just a cable running, very directly, and each button, each switch was being pressed remotely only by virtue of the fact that there was just a long cable that stretched from here to there. And there was an individual control panel for each thing being controlled. So it was very one-to-one. And then you had this distributed control system thing where suddenly you have a centralized control room with one of these panels. And you can kind of see how all of these panels are the same. And then you had a situation where suddenly you had one panel and a means to switch back and forth between which device you were controlling or monitoring. And this was sort of the distributed control. And then suddenly there was logic applied to it where you could just automatically control these things. You could program them to control themselves based on certain conditions. Like if it gets too hot, shut it down, or at least, slow it down, or whatever it is, right? So you had suddenly automation entering the picture, and you had programmable logic controllers. So, there's a lot of confusing terms around PLCs and DCS and ICS and SCADA, which technically is, it's used to refer to anything that controls or pulls data, but technically speaking, SCADA is only the acquisition of data, not like control. But these things are actually older than the internet. So for perspective, let's talk about the Modbus protocol. The Modbus protocol was published in 1979, and it was designed to work over serial cables. And it was later adapted to different carriers so that you didn't have to have a serial cable going from here to there. And to give you perspective on just how long ago 1979 was and what existed at that time, I believe the Ethernet standard was published. It was either published or it was introduced in 1980. So this predates Ethernet. This protocol predates the existence of Ethernet, which is crazy, right? So this definitely this is before the internet was a thing. So the PHY, the physical layer on which it operates, was initially a cable, right? It was never. It was designed to be something that ran inside of a plant, and maybe you would have multiple buildings that it would run between, but you're really talking about a protocol that was made to resemble a panel like this. It was based on exactly this sort of thing. And when you actually look at the details in the Modbus protocol, this becomes very clear, because you have, these concepts of the coil and the discrete input, as they're called in the Modbus protocol. And these are binary values. They can either be on or off, and they're read-write, which very much resembles a physical switch or, a toggle button, right? And then you have discrete inputs, which are just light, basically like indicator lights. They're either on or off, and you can't control them. You can only read them. Same goes for input registers and holding registers, which can have a variable value from, I think, 1 to 255. They had a range of values, and again, there's the read-only version and the read-write version, which very much resembles the gauges and dials that you can see on this physical control panel here, pictured on the slide. Now let's talk about the birth of IoT. It was the early 80s, and there was a CMU grad student who really liked Coca-Cola, and he would go and get Coca-Cola from the vending machine that was, I think it was a couple flights of stairs removed from his office. And he really got tired of it because sometimes he would go to the soda machine and there was no soda in it. Sometimes it would be sold out. Sometimes he would get there and, sorry about that. Sometimes he would get there and the soda wouldn't be cold. So he would have to go and get this soda manually. And he thought, well, here I am studying computer networks and the internet, which at the time had somewhere under 300 nodes on it. There were somewhere less than 300 computers that were actually on what would become the internet. And he decided that one of those nodes should be that soda machine. So he hooked up a board to the inside of the soda machine to monitor the indicator lights, which would say when a particular slot in the soda machine was vending, because the light would blink, or when it was out, which I think it would hold steady at on, or when it was ready to vend, which was off. And so he had this whole logic set up where, he would poll every a few times a second and just figure out, based on that information, when something was vended, when it was restocked, when the he had this whole system for figuring it out. And there became this sort of culture around hacking this Coke machine, and adding functionality to it, and all this wonderful stuff, adding extra features to it, which apparently the technicians hated that. And they kept telling them, whenever they had to come in to service the thing, they kept telling them, take this stuff out. So they had this process where, when they actually had to call in a technician, they would take everything out of the machine and put it back in. Point was, this was done kind of as a joke, in a way. It kind of, as an experiment, kind of out of laziness, in a way. And when this guy was later interviewed about having done this, he said, I never expected to be interviewed about this like 20, 30 years later. I never thought that this would be a thing. There was a running joke at the time that, you would put your toaster on the internet in the future. And now we actually have that. We are actually there today. So it's the thing about IoT is that from its inception, IoT has been very ad hoc. Everything is developed independently of everything else. And a lot of it really does come from hobbyist projects and just silly things like this, to be frank. And so you have a lot of fragmentation, and in some ways this is good, and in some ways this is bad. And we'll talk a little bit about the what the homogeneousness of the IoT landscape as it developed, how that was a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing about it is that it did create this situation where you could update a whole range of devices, and if security updates were provided for one platform, they would apply to others too. The problem with that, of course, is that when you have this homogeneous environment, if you have a security problem that applies to one, there's a good chance that it applies to others as well. And we'll see some of the results of that in just a minute. So let's talk about the event that may very well have been the first hack of any ICS device. And this happened in 1982 in what was at the time the Soviet Union. The CIA, or it was claimed anyway, that the explosion that happened in the Trans-Siberian pipeline was the result of a hack perpetrated by the CIA against the Soviet Union. And this was, of course, it was denied by a KGB officer. And it's not, we have no real confirmation outside of a claim in a book by, this one US official. So, and there was a certain amount of propaganda that was involved in the tensions between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So it wouldn't be surprising if this were just claimed as a form, as a sort of psyop, as a form of propaganda. But it was claimed. So we don't have confirmation. The first one, the one that we do have confirmation of, was a hack on Salt River Project, which was a utility company. It turned out that they had a dial-up modem connected to a backup computer, and the perpetrator in this hack, which was brought to court, and everything was made public through the court systems. So we have confirmation of this. It was all fleshed out. So it was confirmed, and this hacker affected water and power systems, ICS systems related to water and power delivery. There was also some other stuff, some records that were messed around with. But this is the first time that we have a confirmed hack of ICS devices, something that's publicly known and confirmed. Then you have, in 1999, you have the slammer worm, which I included here because it took out a nuclear plant safety monitor system for hours. I think it was around 5 hours that it was down. And I included this here not because it was targeting ICS, but because it wasn't targeting ICS. That ICS by this time had become so prevalent, so widespread, and so connected with the internet. The internet itself had grown so large and so connected with everything that a worm that wasn't even trying to affect process control managed to, simply by accident, simply by having spread far enough, it actually managed to take out ICS systems, which I think that this constitutes a turning point, right? This is a point where the internet really started to seep into everything, as did computers. The first time that I could find, and if somebody else knows of an earlier presentation on ICS security, please let me know in comments or Q&A or something. I would love to be educated otherwise. The first one that I could find was in 2007, which was a presentation at, I think it was DEF CON 15, where the presenter talked about fuzzing ICS protocols. One of the things about ICS protocols is that, somewhat like IoT, there is a certain amount of fragmentation. Everybody kind of seems to want to make their own protocol or use some standard protocol. Now, we talked about Modbus. That's an example of a publicly published protocol that a lot of people use. BACnet is another one that similar properties, where it doesn't have any sort of authentication. Modbus also, I want to mention, doesn't have any authentication because it was always meant to be a person in the same building who's authorized to do work rather than someone across the internet. But we'll see why that's, we've seen that hasn't been the case since, well, a long time now. But anyway, I wanted to point this out because this is when the security community seemed to really start talking about it. And at DEF CON is important because that is probably the largest, it's certainly the largest hacker conference in the United States. I'm not sure by attendance if the Chaos Communications Congress or DEF CON is bigger, but the point is we really started talking about this in earnest somewhere after the turn of the millennium, despite the fact that there were hacks affecting ICS gear before that time. And this brings us to Stuxnet. And it's theorized, it's rumored that the development of Stuxnet began during George W. Bush's presidency in the US. And this was a targeted attack. If there's anyone who's watching this who doesn't already know what Stuxnet is, it was a targeted attack against the Iranian nuclear program, which was very, very successful. It sabotaged some centrifuges in a uranium enrichment facility in Iran, in I think Tehran. It set them back by, I think it was estimated about 7 years of progress was lost to the Iranians as a result of this attack. And it managed to leak out to the public. And, for a number of years before this came out, there were information security professionals who were proclaiming very loudly that cyber war wasn't real, that nobody's actually doing this stuff, that this is the stuff of science fiction, and nobody's actually doing this. This is just a hoax. You're just trying to scare people to sell pen tests. And there was actually one notable security person who's done a lot of admittedly great work over the years, who wrote a blog post about exactly this, how cyber war wasn't real. And I think it was only 2 months after that that the existence of Stuxnet became known. And he actually came out and said, yeah, I was wrong. And I think that this was, again, a turning point in the security community taking attacks on ICS seriously. This was a wake-up moment for many of us, not just because this was something that targeted ICS gear specifically, but because it was also incredibly sophisticated. Whereas most of the attacks that we see in the wild don't use vulnerabilities that we don't already know about. Usually big attacks are something that the world already is aware of and just hasn't done a great job of patching against yet. This used not one, but something like 5 zero-day exploits. And judging by the exploit market, it was millions of dollars, millions of US dollars worth of research. If you sold all of the bugs, you would be a multimillionaire. That's how sophisticated this was. Again, I think this was a turning point. I think this got a lot of people, I know that this got a lot of people who weren't really paying attention to nation state attacks, to cyber war, to attacks on critical infrastructure. It got a lot of people to pay attention. There was a talk in 2012 from a guy named Dan Tentler called Drinking from the Caffeine Fire Hose. And it was a really simple talk, but I thought it was impactful. And it was one of the first times where people started to explore what's actually connected to the internet, rather than taking some device and at least as far as ICS goes, there were projects to scan the entire internet that had happened before then. But we also kind of reached a point where bandwidth, our internet connections were fast enough, and the internet space, that IPv4 provides is small enough that you really can actually scan the entire internet. And we're not quite at a point, and now with IPv6, like that's no longer really the case. We're still back at a place where you can't actually scan every node on the internet. But back before IPv6 was really a thing, back when we just had IPv4 addresses, you really could. You could scan the entire internet. And there are projects that do that. One of them, the more famous one, is Shodan. And this talk was basically just, hey, let's go see what's on Shodan. And guy spent several months to a year just poking around on Shodan to see what he could find, and he found some honestly terrifying things. So let's move on. You'll see why I bring that one up in a moment. Same guy actually put together a proof of concept based on this bug, where with a certain brand of web cameras that were in some cases branded as security cameras, but they were IP cameras that were internet attached. And as it turned out, you could just, rather than putting in a username and password, click OK on the dialog box where you would normally be expected to put in the username and password. But you didn't have to. And if you didn't and you just pressed OK, you would be given access anyway. And this was a really just inexcusable flaw. I think this was one of the few times where the FTC actually stepped in and levied a fine against somebody for a vulnerability, because it was just this bad and it affected so many people in such a personal way. And there were sites that just let you, that cataloged these open cameras and let you just go view a random webcam somewhere on the internet in real time. And that site got shut down, as you might imagine. It wasn't really that site's fault that the camera feeds were being exposed, but it, probably made things a little bit easier than they should have been, so to speak. Anyway, then you have the Mirai botnet, which kind of has been plaguing us for a couple of years now, but in its initial form, it was a botnet that compromised IoT devices, mainly routers and things like that had default passwords. And it started with just compromising devices through default passwords. And, it's actually pretty amazing how far you can get with just default passwords. And this infected Linux-based IoT devices. I think a lot of them running on OpenWRT, just because it was a thing where you could easily get the firmware. It was a homogeneous environment, and there were a lot of these things just sitting out on the internet. So the Mirai botnet took advantage of all these factors and made a massive botnet that unleashed some of the most devastating DDoS attacks that we've seen just kind of ever. There was one confirmed attack, I think it was on a French telecom, that exceeded 1 terabit per second, which is absolutely insane, absolutely crazy to be able to push that much data. That is just based off of devices that have default passwords, which should, I think, tell you something about the state of IoT security. That there are so many devices out there with default passwords, not even forget vulnerabilities, forget mistakes in coding. They just didn't require you to set a password that was different than the one that it came out of the box with. That alone was able to give somebody the ability to push 1 terabit per second. That, to me, is significant. In 2018, myself and a couple colleagues, and I know I'm showing off my own work here, deal with it, I'm the speaker. We found that there was a lack of study on smart city devices. And I want to talk briefly about the smart city devices, because I do, it's really not, I joke about this being just a plug for my own research, which it is, but at the same time, it's also because I really do honestly think it's important. I think it's important because with smart city devices, it's not like IoT. You don't have to put the smart speakers in your home. If you decide that that's not for you, okay, fine. If you want to buy a feature phone, just a flip phone, you don't have to have a smartphone, and all the risk that potentially comes along with that. You have a lot of choice about what devices are in your life. But when you live in a city that's deploying technology, especially technology connected to the internet, especially technology that captures private data about you, or personally identifiable data, at least, when these things are being put into the cities that we live in and we don't have a choice about that, we need to be very cautious about this. We need to be paying attention to the security of these devices. Have they gone under any sort of security microscope, so to speak? Has anyone looked at these things? Well, based on the devices that we analyzed, having found pre-authentication code execution flaws, basically we were able to completely take over all the devices that we studied. We found sometimes multiple ways to completely take over these devices. Checking into this after 2 years hence, there's still hundreds of the devices that we found vulnerable still exposed to the internet. And if Mirai taught us anything, it's that people don't change default passwords. And so even though these devices may be patched now, and maybe they're not. They still may have default passwords. And these devices are for things like connecting you to ICS gear, right? One of the devices is what's known as the ILON family of devices. And its entire purpose is to take protocols like LAN talk, which is an industrial control systems protocol, and allow you to communicate via LAN talk from that device, and then also hook that device up to an IP network like the internet. So basically, the thing I said shouldn't be done, where you expose these vulnerable protocols to the internet, that's exactly what this thing does. So that's funny that is a thing. I'm not sure that the point of the ILON device was to expose devices to the internet, but if you look for them on Shodan, or my preferred one is Census, that's CENSYS.io, you can find these devices still out there on the internet. And one last thing that I want to point out, there might be this open question about, well, are there people still attacking ICS? Maybe it's exposed to the internet. Maybe it's vulnerable. Are there people actually attacking it? Well, there's a research project that was unveiled this year where they set up an entire fake company complete with marketing website. And it was like they pitched themselves as a manufacturing company. They said, let us know whatever you want to build. We'll build it for you. We have state-of-the-art facilities with, this and this and that. They set up real PLCs. They set up some simulated ones as well. And they had like an actual realistic setup where you had like an HMI, which is a human machine interface. It's what engineers will usually use to interact with the PLCs, and thus the HVAC systems, boilers, whatever else it is you're controlling. And they also set up a lot of intentional vulnerabilities. So if you're not familiar with the idea of a honeypot, it's an intentionally vulnerable system whose value lies in its being compromised. So they set up this entire fake company and network complete with PLCs, HMIs, et cetera, et cetera. They really made it as detailed and realistic as possible. They had 39 break-ins, and not all of them were intentional, right? Not all of them sort of went for the throat, so to speak. There was actually one person who broke into an exposed VNC server, which they set up to be showing a like a 3D modeling software or something like that with a robotic arm, right? And they had like a PLC meant to attach to a controllable robotic arm, like the one that they had modeled up on VNC. And one person who broke in actually just logged in via passwordless VNC and left a little note on the desktop that says, hey, you should probably put a password on this machine. So not everybody was really trying to seriously gain, operational control over these devices, or the ability to sabotage them, or some persistence on that. 13 of those attacks were. So we had at least, according to their analysis, 13 different threat actors that, for whatever reason, wanted to take over a manufacturing facility. So I think that shows that today we are actually dealing with threat actors who want to break into these things. So let's go back to thinking about that drinking from the caffeine fire hose talk for just a moment, which was just an exploration of, well, what's out there. I thought it would be fun, since siberXchange is Canada-based and I think Toronto-based, That's what I was told. If I'm incorrect, well, this next section is going to be awkward. Let's talk for a minute, because certain things just shouldn't be exposed to the internet, right? We talked about how ICS protocols are meant to be just like a panel of dials, switches, lights, etc. And there's nothing else designed around it, no authentication whatsoever. If you can talk to it, you can control it. There's nothing that prevents unauthorized commands whatsoever. If you can talk to it, you can control it and do whatever it is the thing does. So they should never be exposed. Same thing with Modbus and BACnet. They should never be exposed. So with that in mind, I found 51 hosts with Modbus over TCP, because Modbus itself is its own protocol, but Modbus over TCP is the only one that you can really connect to the internet. I found 51 hosts in Toronto alone with Modbus over TCP exposed. And in Canada as a whole, there were 901 hosts with Modbus over TCP exposed. In Toronto, there were 250 hosts with BACnet over TCP exposed, and this is a building automation control. That's what BAC stands for in this case, with BACnet over TCP exposed. So these were building control automation interfaces that were exposed to the entire internet. And in Canada as a whole, there were a whopping 2,438 hosts with BACnet over TCP exposed. And that's in Canada alone. Let's take a look at some of these. This one was nice enough to, in the description, tell us precisely where it was located. And you might be feeling a little bit uncomfortable right now with the amount of information I'm disclosing. I did think about this. The fact is, this is exposed to the internet. Anybody who seriously wants to do something bad with this already has the means to figure this out, already knows about this. I am telling you only what everyone else already knows, should they care to look. This is basically, Census is basically Google for more than just web pages. So if you want to go in and search for all the exposed BACnet devices in Canada or wherever else you feel like it, you can do that too. So I didn't feel like redacting any of this was particularly useful, since the information is, the cat's already out of the bag. So let's move on. This web server is hosted on the same host on the same IP as an exposed BACnet host, as an exposed BACnet service, rather, BACnet over TCP. So we can actually not only control the building automation controls that have been exposed, we also can see a handy map here of where the buildings we're messing with are. So if you want to mess with a building that's just right on lovely Lake Ontario, that's apparently a thing that's exposed to the internet as of, I think 2 days ago was when I found this and took this screenshot. Here is an exposed, it looks like this is read-only. It looks like this is read-only. There was also a button for, hey, connect to this terminal. But I thought that probably crossed a line. So I took a picture of this, but I didn't actually enter the terminal because I thought that maybe that was too much. The point is, this seems like it's more than just read-only. But here is, some data about, I think, water pressure, probably. So this is maybe not particularly interesting to you or I, but if there was somebody who wanted to mess with the pressure, for instance, there might be serious problems that they could cause. This, again, is exposed to the internet. I don't remember why this particular one. This was, I think that this was related to industrial control in some way. What I can tell you about this is that ProFTPD suffered from a memory corruption bug, I believe it was. Either way, the exploit is in Metasploit. So if you're capable of downloading and using Metasploit, there is a server exposed to the internet here that has this old version of ProFTPD. I would be very surprised if this hadn't already been compromised, just because it's running an old version of software known to be vulnerable with an exploit in Metasploit trunk exposed to the internet. So moving on, here is a login panel for a wireless router that connects via 3G, 4G. That's the whole Airlink thing. And we got a login page here. But again, we can find default passwords. And as the Mirai botnet showed us, well, there's a lot of things out there with default passwords. I didn't try to log in with a default password here because, again, that would be over a line. That would be crossing a line. The point is that I probably shouldn't be able to even see this login page. This probably should not be exposed to the internet. Here is another page with configuration information for a smart power meter that, again, is exposed to the internet. So here, again, we have a login page. This one, again, is for a smart power meter. And so we have a couple problems here. We have no username and just a password, which means we don't have to guess a username and a password. We can just guess a password. But on top of the fact that this doesn't require you to guess both a username and a password, even setting aside the potential for default password here, Modbus was also exposed here. So in the case that we can't guess the password here as, you know, this theoretical attacker, we still have Modbus. So it's a bit of a moot point, probably. There's a very good chance that whatever the user access level can see, we can see through Modbus, and whatever the admin can change, we can change through Modbus. I thought that this was interesting. I don't think that this one is actually in Canada, but I thought I'd throw it up there anyway, because this is apparently a service where you can take your HMI, your easy control software for controlling your ICS gear. And sorry about the I don't know why they made it so dark, but this is just a screenshot. It's like, hey, connect your ICS device to the cloud and control it over the internet. Which is like, you know, speaking from experience, don't do that. Don't do that. That's a thing you don't want to do. So that was a lot. That was a lot. We talked about the past. We talked about the birth of ICS and IoT. We talked about their roots. We talked about some historical hacks and some important research into the fields of what we collectively refer to as cyber physical systems. So what's next? Well, Singapore wants to put 110,000 cameras into, and this was planned in 2017. So it very well may be the case that this has already happened. This may already be the case. They may already be deployed, but cameras and facial recognition technology. And not to be outdone ever, Dubai wants to have its first police station staffed entirely by autonomous police robots by 2030. I really hope something changes in the next 10 years that would make me feel more comfortable with this. But I think if it were to be done today, I would probably expect something like RoboCop to be the result of it. So that's where we're headed. That's at least the direction we're going right now with regards to smart cities. Another thing is that I wanted to bring up is that in a couple of days, X-Force Red is also going to be publicly disclosing a flaw that we have been working to address and get patched across the world with the help of the vendor, who, thank God, has been very cooperative and understands the problem and really wants to get it fixed. So we've been working closely with them, and what it means is basically code execution across a wide range of different devices, and we will be discussing it at an upcoming event. I don't want to plug it directly. If you're interested in it, you can find it. I don't want to say, hey, thanks for coming to this conference, go to this other thing. But I wanted to point it out because we're still in a stage of maturity with IoT devices, with ICS devices, where you can still find a single flaw that affects millions of devices in a very significant way. And I think this is why I say that the state of security in these devices is sad, is because all the lessons that we've learned about not exposing things to the internet, just not having a password on anything at all, it seems like the first lesson that you could learn in computer security. And yet, as I've shown you, there's just a litany of different places where this isn't considered at all. And it was all fun and games when this was just websites, online retailers and stuff. When it was just your credit card being stolen, that was one thing. But I think things really changed when we as I say we, I mean attackers. When attackers suddenly had the ability to shut off water and power to a city full of residents, when you can shut down a nuclear power plant's safety monitoring system by accident, just by having a particularly good bug. I think we have a long way to go. I think that we need to get a lot better. We need to take this a lot more seriously because the risks are higher. We're giving computers some very important jobs today. And unless we're taking the security of that seriously, maybe we shouldn't do that. I do hope that this slide in particular scares you, that we, in 10 years, we have autonomous police robots that are supposed to hold one of the most important roles, protecting people's well-being, this should scare you. I think this at least until we get better at this. And I feel like I've sat here and monologued for a little long, so let's move past this. But I don't really have anything more to say, except maybe to answer questions if there are any.
Hi, Daniel. This is Farwa from siberX. We do have a few questions lined up for you. I was just hooked from start to finish. So the first question being, IoT devices such as sensors are typically considered hacked when data is stolen or breached. Can these IoT devices also be spoofed to emit false data to our controls?
Yes. I know I'm like plugging my own research again, and I'm sorry. I'm not. I swear I'm not that vain. But it's relevant. In the research that we did on smart city devices, one of the things that we hacked were these devices called the Meshlium, which was sort of a hub for taking in IoT sensor data, things like water pressure level or wind speed or in leaf wetness. There's an interesting sensor. There was a case study from the vendor's website where the government of Spain had these sensors around nuclear power plants in the country of Spain. And we found all of these things exposed to the internet. And as a result of researching the device, we found a way to bypass the authentication and take complete control of the device as root. Now, when you are in control, complete control, when you have root on something that aggregates all of this sensor data and then ships it off somewhere, well, of course you can falsify that data. Of course you can provide bad data back. And another good example of that is that in addition to messing with the centrifuges in the Iranian nuclear plant that Stuxnet attacked, in addition to attacking those centrifuges, it also attacked the HMIs insofar as it provided data that would lead the operator of those centrifuges to believe that they were working under the correct parameters, when in reality they were speeding up and slowing down, causing them to wear out very, very fast. And so, yes, not only can it be done, it has been proven that it can be done. It's not just theory, and it's even been done in attacks in the wild. So yes, absolutely a possibility. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. That was a fantastic answer. The next question for you is, can you comment on the changes in the attack surfaces of IoT devices that relay across wireless commercial 5G networks?
What I can say about that is that our ever-broadening connectivity, like any other technological advance, is a double-edged sword. The fact that something can be accessed wherever it is, as long as it has cell service, and 5G is another iteration forward in trying to provide high-speed connections and availability. But an increase in connectivity does mean an increase in attack surface. When you have all these devices that are connected to the cell network that can be reached by anything else on the cell network, it means that, yes, our connectedness is good, and it means that things can talk to each other from all over the world, but it also means that things can attack each other from all over the world. I think that's all I think that's the only intelligent thing that I have to say on that matter.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We have around 7 minutes left, so I have one more question for you. Could you comment on the geographical locations from which IoT-driven attacks are emerging from?
My particular role is in offensive security. I tend to be the one breaking things. To make a cheesy Breaking Bad reference, I am the one who knocks. So I don't spend a lot of time researching threats, looking for threats. There are data sets out there on attacks that have been identified. One thing that I would caution you on is that the origin of attacks geographically might be misleading. And the reason that I say that is that there is always a problem with trying to pin an IP address to an actor, because an IP address is not a person. And To give you an example, I'm going to bring up what's called the malware defense, where legally somebody is accused of committing some sort of computer crime. And the prosecution says, you did this and we know it because this is your IP address. Your ISP confirmed that you had this IP address at the time that this attack occurred, and we can trace this attack back to your IP address positively. We have every node along the way cooperating, giving us the data, and it all points back to you. And then the defense says, well, my client had malware on their system at the time the attack occurred. It was being used by someone who attacked them to attack someone else and hide the true origin of that attack. And when the attack was complete, the attacker wiped all traces of the malware, uninstalled it, and wiped all traces of the malware from my client's system. And unless you have forensic data available to you about that system that tells you whether it was or was not infected with malware at the time, and you can, if you wipe securely and scrub with random data over where the malware was, it's possible that you could clean up every trace. It's possible. It is also possible that you could miss something, but the fact that it is a plausible explanation for why somebody could be at the IP address from where an attack originated, but not actually the real source of the attack, you can never truly say. So I think trying to tie back attacks to their origin based on IP address is an inherently flawed metric. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I'm just going to go back to the little reference you made. I heard my team laughing, so thank you for that. And with that, I would just like to say thank you for being a part of siberXchange, and I'll just pass it back to you for a few closing comments.
Oh, I get to do closing comments. I think I might have monologued long enough. Well, I guess I'd like to say thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope that what you take away from this is that we are in a pretty immature state, and that hopefully we can do better in the future. And that I think is the point of conferences like siberXchange. So to the organizers of siberXchange, thank you for putting this on. Thank you for inviting me as well. And to the people attending, to the people who are watching, thank you for watching, and thank you for taking this topic seriously. It's very close to my heart, and I would like to see more people take it seriously. So thank you attendees for attending.